I'm working with a London-based company called Wazoku. And I think what's interesting about Wazoku is, in fact, 2 years ago in 2020, the year 2020, Innocentive became part of Wazoku. And of course, Innocentive is very well known, I hope and believe, in the world of freelancing. And indeed, I started working with Innocentive all the way back in 2012, involved in the European arena, working with many companies across the European arena as they've introduced open innovation approaches. And in fact, during that time, I've seen Innocentive's freelance community, which has now been renamed just recently as the Wazoku Crowd. I've seen that community grow from a couple of 100,000 freelancers and innovators, all the way up to multiple hundreds of thousands now, right across the world. And really, Wazoku's role is to provide opportunities for freelancers. So in a way, we're working with the companies who've got problems that they want to solve. And so we're encouraging those companies to work with us so that we can present some of their challenges and some of their problems. And so that freelancers across the world can then take part in helping to solve those problems. So I'm going to spend some time today talking a little bit more about this. Okay, the first thing that's actually quite interesting is when we think about companies and we think about the problems that they're working on, the amount of human capital that they consistently activate to help them solve problems is incredibly small. In fact, this figure here, 0.05%, is actually a massive exaggeration. It's nothing like as big as this. Typically, companies are using 10 to 20 people. They go to the same 10 to 20 people. And if you net that up across the size of those companies, and if we think about just people employed in big companies, but then think about just the people in the world that they could turn to, the figure in terms of human capital that they're activating to help solve their problems is incredibly small. So sometimes it's not surprising that many of the innovations are really just not innovative at all, or they're very small tech step changes. Our goal is to provide companies with the opportunity to activate bigger populations, the freelancer community, in helping them to solve their problems. So, in fact, Wazoku, our kind of name, our tagline is changing the world one idea at a time. And today I'm going to look at really how that comes together. And of course, one of the key things about making this come together is with the help of freelancers. And so one of these things is, while we're convincing companies to take part, of course, we want you to come to us so that we can help you take part in helping these companies address their problems, some of which are really important when it comes to changing the world, with companies being so focused today on issues to do with sustainability. So we need you, and in fact, I'll show you in a few moments, for those who don't know, how you can become part of this. And of course, that really leads us on to the question of how can these companies find you? You know, how can they find you to help them get to the solutions to their problems? And here's a little interesting challenge to set in a way. If we look at these different problems, so these are problems that various of our clients have been looking at, have been involved with. In fact, they've solved them. And you can see these cover a range of different areas: textiles, nutrition, microbiome, repurposing drugs, drug delivery, sustainable butter dishes. I mean a huge array of challenges, straight away tapping into different fields and different disciplines. But the interesting thing is, you know, what do you think might be the connection between these challenges? What ties these together? Just a momentary pause, because I'm actually going to tell you the answer. And the answer is that a single freelancer from Bulgaria solved all of these problems. Now, of course, none of the companies knew that freelancer. His name was Martin. In fact, his name was Martin G, just to provide a bit more individuality to Martin. He came from Bulgaria, or he comes from Bulgaria. But Martin provided the solution to all of these problems for a number of different companies. In fact, each of these problems was being conducted by a different company or needed to be solved by a different company. So it begs the question, how do companies find Martin? How can companies engage these sometimes brilliant minds? And of course, we know they really don't typically fit hiring criteria, or perhaps they don't want to fit hiring criteria. And of course, they operate outside of those typical industry requirements when it comes to recruitment. So how do they find Martin? And of course, we know today the world is connected. And Wazoku is providing the opportunity for companies to solve with anyone, anywhere, at any time. That's really our purpose in life, to provide that intermediary role, bringing the companies and freelancers like you all together. So just a little bit about Wazoku, and really this slide just provides a little bit of context around the way we work, but a couple of these points actually are very important. So Wazoku is concerned with innovation in its entirety, innovation communities in their entirety. So yes, Wazoku is concerned actually with making it easier for companies to carry out innovation activities with their staff, also with known partners, so the startups they work with, the universities they work with, their supply chain, and customers who take their products. So Wazoku actually helps provide support for those aspects, those communities that they already work with. But of course, as Alina was saying, you heard about open innovation yesterday, and it's this part on the right-hand side where it becomes really interesting in terms of our open innovation, or the Wazoku crowd, as mentioned at the bottom here, the challenge center, which is where freelancers can register or are registered and take part in problems that our clients want to conduct to an open community. But the process behind this is really important, because there are some key factors in giving these companies the security, the accountability, and the confidence that the process is going to work for them. And so the process that we allow companies to follow as part of working with us and our platform and with the Wazoku crowd is there's mechanisms to work with the companies really to find some of those issues, some of those problems that are appropriate to seek help from freelancers. And a key part of that, and I'll talk about this quite a lot later, is the challenge design. So it's all very well a company having a problem that they're interested in seeking the support of freelancers. But what is the problem? And are we really addressing the correct problem? And so challenge design and the problem framing is a really key part of the work that we do, preparing a challenge so that it can engage across a freelancer community, an open community, covering all sorts of skills and know-how and knowledge areas. Then, of course, the challenge itself and the collaboration around the challenge, giving freelancers the opportunity to take part. But then, of course, for companies, there's also the important following steps so that they can then evaluate the solutions they receive. And reward and recognition, of course, a key part. Why are you going to spend your time taking part in a challenge? So we've got important incentive mechanisms, and we actually help to conduct these for our customers. We conduct these by allowing money to change hands between these companies and you as freelancers we handle that processing, so it doesn't go through the complexity of being dealt with as suppliers on their systems. So that simplifies things massively for these companies. And then finally, the governance, of course, is key. The confidentiality in the problem, the handling of intellectual property. And we have particular mechanisms that are repeated and have been carried out hundreds and hundreds of times to provide confidence to these companies that the process will be effective for them, but also make it very clear for you as freelancers what we're asking you to submit and how your intellectual property is being handled. So this all comes together as part of the Wazoku proposition. Okay, so during the course of doing this now for many years, we've been able to use our community of freelancers to provide over 200,000 proposed solutions, proposed innovations. In return, companies have paid $60 million of awards, which we've processed. So we've handled those transactions, as I mentioned a moment ago. And as I touched on also a few moments ago, study from these outcomes has recorded that, you know, really it is a case that many of these problems are getting solved because freelancers represent a different view on the problem. They represent different fields of expertise, and so we can see them coming from adjacent or sometimes unrelated expertise in terms of how they're able to address the problem. And as I mentioned before, they absolutely very often do not fit any hiring criteria, which of course has been very much the choice of working in this way. So crowdsourced open innovation, really the way we like to talk about this is just considering three simple elements. Number one, our community of solvers. So we call the freelancers who've registered amongst our community, we call you all solvers. It's our terminology for those members of the community. Then, of course, we have the challenge, which is being conducted, and all the mechanisms around running that challenge that I mentioned a moment ago. And then the challenge center itself at the Wazoku website. So this is where we are broadcasting or promoting challenges out to you, but actually out to the world, and giving anyone the chance to come in and register as a solver and then register to participate in the challenge. So let's quickly go and look at the website. I'm just going to drop out here, and so we're going to look at free-to-air websites. So this is the sort of thing that that any of you can do. So hopefully you can see my my justice slide. Alina, if you could just give me a quick nod to confirm that you can see that, thank you. And so this is the this is the agenda today, actually, for this future work week. But let's click on here and just go to the Wazoku website. And on the Wazoku website, so this is at wazoku.com, and you can see down here it talks about the activities that Wazoku carries out. But there's all sorts of helpful information for you down here about what Wazoku is concerned with, but more importantly, the Wazoku crowd and how you can become a solver, and also how you can sign up for being told about these challenges, which hopefully can help to change the world for the better. And down here, there's information about the challenges that are active today, and you can go and see more information. Here's some of the awards that are available for taking part in the challenges. And in fact, down the bottom here, so it says, changing the world, how solvers are tackling some of these pressing problems. How you can earn money for being successful with the solutions that you provide. There's that mention of that $60 million again. And sometimes, of course, it's not just about the money. Sometimes it's about recognition in taking part in these activities. This video is great. Please run this video. It just takes a minute and it provides great information about things. Now, Let me just quickly click on this link here, signing up for the challenge bulletin. And yeah, please go here, and it tells you about becoming a solver, becoming part of this diverse community. It talks about the MIT co-climate community that has become part of the Wazoku crowd in recent times. That's another 120,000 freelancers around the world now join the community in a short period of time. And here's some examples of things that really did change the world. Solver stories. You know, there's this nice example here of protecting hundreds of millions by retrofitting foundations. So we can see, there you go, it mentions in a sentence now part of Wazoku, but this is all to do with the problems around the world, in the developing world, with hurricanes and earthquakes, and the problems that has with the houses and the foundations of those houses. So a challenge was run just earlier this year towards coming up with effective ways of retroactively fitting foundations. And in fact, you can see that the winners here, they came from the Philippines, where this problem is significant. And the winners of this challenge, here are their names. They were awarded $25,000 for their great solutions. So let's go back to my presentation. And Alina, again, if you could just nod to confirm, thank you, that we're sharing the presentation again. So some extra information now to tell you about our process and looking a bit further about some of these key elements. So firstly, this community of solvers, it's freelancers, as I mentioned, they are our solvers, and there's hundreds of thousands who've registered as part of this community. It's very easy to do, just short amount of basic information, and you're part of our community. And we can tell you about some of these important problems that companies are trying to solve. And of course, increasingly, these relate to sustainability problems that all these companies are now facing and are moving on at pace. So this community is active. Hundreds are joining it every single month. And of course, the key thing is the experience within the community. And there's technology, there's science, there's engineering, there's business and entrepreneurialism, data, statistics. So it's a cross-disciplinary resource, which of course is terribly attractive to all of these companies for them to be able to tap into in a reliable way. And when we talk about solvers, you know, what makes them so interesting for these companies is really the way they're able to look at the world. They're prepared for solving problems, but because of this unbiased approach, they're really just looking at the problem. They're not so much looking at you. And they're very good at connecting these unknown dots based upon the experience they have. Things that those within a company, you know, who are stuck probably looking at problems in the same way time and again. For you as freelancers, you know, you're not held back by those issues. And many of you are passionate and can bring a lot of experience to bear. And they're very interested in tapping into how that can assist them. So the long tail of innovation is something that we talk about a lot. I suspect it may have been talked about already. Forgive me if I'm repeating the same ground here, but I think it's interesting because if we think of, this is a company, it's actually a very big company in the world, and how they started to look at the world. The fact that you've got the general population, and you know, and this in a way represents the level of expertise. And then if you think of a big company, but of course a big company thinks they're much bigger than they actually are. So really that big company is just down there. In fact, that's too big. And then but that's their relative size. So this quote comes from Bill Joy, the founder of Sun Microsystems, and recognizing that really the smartest people just aren't going to work for them. So how can you tap into this high value area of the general population? And this is really where we're involved. And so translating this really into our talk and into our community, if you think of all the companies that we're working with, So of course they have their own R&D groups, their own product development groups, their own sustainability groups, but that's really represented down here. And of course they have their partners that they work with, and the university partners that they work with. And so that touches into this area, but typically they're looking in the same direct field for those people. And so they're very close to the problem, but they're not so close to the potential world of talent, which is this long tail. And really it's our freelancer community that absolutely could be close to the problem, but oftentimes is a long way from the problem, but still is able to look at the problem and apply things from their areas of know-how that can be very relevant. So companies are very interested in tapping into, and every problem has a long tail to some extent. If it's a very tight scientific area, for sure that long tail is a little bit narrow, but there's still a long tail. But these days, many problems touch, the solution to many problems actually involves combining various different fields and arrays. And this is where freelancers really can start to make a huge difference for these companies. So let's look at a couple firstly, let's look at the way we are engaging with you in our role in between the company and you as freelancers. So firstly, it's all about that problem framing. So we work closely with these companies to understand more about the problems before they go out to the Wazoku crowd. Interestingly, we don't have to just think about the Wazoku crowd here. We also have our own connected community mechanisms. That means that we can help companies work not just across the Wazoku crowd, but across all communities. We've got clever technology that allows our companies to look at these crowds as connected communities. Yes, there's some stuff that goes on in the background, but we can actually help to make that happen. And then, of course, there's the incentives which are driving, we hope, driving your interest to participate in helping these companies change the world. And when we look at challenges, they really tend to come in two distinct forms. Firstly, the more strategic challenges helping to inform the projects they want to work on and the things they want to consider as part of those projects. So it's challenges that are thinking about what should we do. It's all about brainstorming, insights, gathering know-how from a broad array of places. And then once they've decided what they want to do, when they've determined their strategy, it's coming up with the best ways of doing it. So how can we do it? Actually solving some of the specific requirements that allow us, that bring the focus and get them to the solutions. So we run challenges across these different categories, and we've got a well-known set of challenge categories: ideations, theoreticals, reduction to practice, and then partnering and scouting, which is our way of helping the freelancer community understand what type of question we're asking and the category of work that we're looking for. And so these ideation challenges, this is the more strategic, where we're looking for solutions where our clients get a right to use any of the concepts or ideas that they get from those challenges. And then the more discrete challenges with specific requirements, where the awards can actually be really quite considerable. They actually have gone up to $1 million. We've run 5 or 6 challenges where the awards run to $1 million. And in this case, it's all about meeting very specific requirements. And if your solution meets those requirements, you can win those awards. And there can be partial awards for partially meeting requirements, providing good building blocks. And then there's the partnering types of challenges where our clients are just looking for expertise or know-how that can help. So let's look at some quick further examples. Years ago, the oil disaster, the Exxon Valdez, an institute was set up, bringing together know-how from across the world to help solve many of the problems in protecting that environment after the disaster. And yet it's really interesting to see that years later, they were still struggling with some significant problems. And one of the big problems they had was this oil had frozen. And while they could get this oil, this frozen oil, out of the water, they couldn't then separate that oil. So they couldn't really remove it completely from the environment. And they brought traditional mines together, but they couldn't come up with an effective way of doing this. So recognizing how freelancers are able to look at problems based upon their distinctive experience. A winning solver won an award of $20,000. And the interesting thing about this particular freelancer was they were an industrial chemist, but critically in vacation work, they worked on construction sites and they'd seen techniques for pouring concrete. So with their chemistry know-how and with this construction site knowledge, practical site knowledge, they came up with a technique which allowed the Institute to actually start moving this frozen oil and processing this frozen oil and finally removing it from the area of the disaster. This challenge, I mean, this brings us to NASA and the sun, and this tower here represents the freelancer that helped NASA. So we have a problem, danger in space, and the background to this is the sun, these solar particle events, which are very dangerous and very hard to predict, but there's lots of data. So how could this data be processed to allow NASA to better predict when these events are going to take place? So NASA's got 10,000, 20,000 engineers and scientists, and yet really they weren't very good at predicting this. It was a 50% success rate, and it was just a 4-hour time window that took place. So they put this data out to our community, out to the world, and asked them to see how they could help. And indeed they could, because they came up with a new algorithm that was 85% accurate and gave them a much bigger time window. This particular solver, freelancer, won a $30,000 award for their algorithm. But the interesting thing was they were a retired radio engineer, previously had worked in a very relevant area, came up with a great solution, and NASA carried on then working with this particular freelancer on that project and on many other projects besides. This generated huge interest around the world, 600 participants from over 50 countries. A pretty tough challenge, but they got a number of high quality solutions. Another challenge that I was closely involved with, so here with the National Health Service in England, so very much looking at changing the world for the better and thinking about health and mental health and the environment that we live in. So the NHS ran what was known as the Healthy New Towns Design Challenge. And I mentioned before the amount of work that goes into understanding the problem, understanding the needs. I'm sure there's been a lot of talk about that already this week. And this is just some examples of workshops we did with the NHS and with various other parties that they were working with to help us understand the problem space and to think about the solution space that they were interested in exploring. So the challenge itself was posted. This took place about 3 or 4 years ago. Here's an example. We were then Innocentive, hadn't quite joined Wazoku at that stage. And you can see that they had these demonstrator sites where they wanted to introduce these new ideas and designs. And while there was an award, you can see there was a $20,000 award, collecting lots of ideas that they could combine and bring together, and some clear structure around how those awards were going to be distributed to the winning freelancers. You can see that on top of receiving the award, there was recognition as well. The NHS was very promotional about the winning solvers and where they came from and some of the ideas that they came up with. And here's just an example. Leading ideas from the USA, India, Japan, and Spain, helping the National Health Service in England. And here's just an example of some of the ideas that they came up with. And what this has led to now is a significant program of how communities around health sites across England are now being redesigned to actually help some of these things take place as just part of the way of living, as part of, let's say, business as usual when it comes to the way you run your life when you're close to health environments. And then looking more commercially, but again in a very important area. Now, A2A is Italy's second largest energy company. And of course, all energy companies are dealing with energy transition. And everyone will be familiar with substations dotted around cities, making noise, taking up too much space, and giving off pollution, and often failing, by the way. So A2A covers this vast region of central Italy from Milan across towards Venice, really the most populated part of Italy. And they're committed to installing 1,000 new substations. But what they wanted to do was see if it was possible to come up with a new design of substation, because putting 1,000 substations into these very densely populated areas is difficult and really not very good for the community. So their interest was, could they actually just deploy these substations below the ground and in a much smaller space? Could they find a design to help them overcome these constraints? And of course, they approached their suppliers, but were somewhat surprised really by the lack of innovation that those known suppliers came up with in this area. So they ran a challenge, which we helped them to post, and they wanted to get results quickly because they had a strategic plan. 2030 actually isn't very long away. And they wanted to, really see if their ambition could be realized. Anyway, this is the winning design. I can't show any more than that because it's actually under protection. They ran a competition in a short period of time. 75 freelancers around the world showed interest, and they collected 12 designs. But the winner from Turkey came up with a phenomenal design that A2A has now taken further. They've now got patent support for this design. They've been working with one of those contractors now on a prototype. And the key thing for A2A, two things. Those 1,000 substations, they're now able to deliver that for the communities that they're responsible for providing energy. But for them, it's actually opened up this massive new business opportunity. They're actually going to sell these substations around the world because, of course, all utilities across the world could benefit from a similar approach. And so their strategic plan, where they're investing something like 2 billion, actually has the potential to get much bigger in terms of what A2A can benefit from, but also how they can help the world in better supporting energy supply in a more resilient and less intrusive way around the world. Okay, thank you. This is what I wanted to talk about today, changing the world one idea at a time. This is how we want to help these companies, and we need your help as freelancers in doing that. So